Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something that's probably impacting your wallet and definitely shaping the global economy, maybe in ways you don't even fully realize. Tariffs. Think of them as these sort of silent forces, influencing everything from maybe the price of your coffee to whether you can get that new phone when it launches.
That's a great way to put it. Tariffs might sound really abstract, an economic thing, right?
hmm
But they're actually incredibly relevant to everyday life.
Yeah.
And today, we're really diving into this big question. Are these tariffs actually, saving local jobs and boosting economies like they're sometimes meant to?
Are they maybe getting in the way of global trade and, I don't know, slowing things down for everyone?
Exactly. That's the core tension.
So, to help us get into this, we've looked at a really interesting resource. It's actually a podcast script that tries to dissect the truth behind some of the recent U.S. trade disputes.
Provide some good context.
Right. So, our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We want to break down what tariffs really are, maybe touch on their history a bit, especially in the U.S.
How they connect or clash with globalization.
Yeah. And do they even work? Who actually pays for them?
And this bigger question, are we maybe seeing a move away from globalization because of things like this?
Okay, so lots to unpack. Let's start right at the beginning. When we say tariff, what are we actually talking about?
Well, simply put, a tariff is just a tax. It's a tax a government puts on goods that are imported, brought into the country from somewhere else.
Okay, a tax on imports. Simple enough.
Yeah, but the reasons for them can differ. You've got what they call protective tariffs.
Protect.
Yeah, the idea is to shield local industries, make the imported stuff more expensive so the locally made version looks, well, cheaper or more attractive. Give the home team an edge, sort of.
Ah, okay, like helping out local companies?
Precisely. Then you have punitive tariffs. These are more like a weapon almost.
A weapon.
Well, economic pressure. A country might use them to punish another nation for maybe unfair trading practices or sometimes even bigger political disagreements.
Gotcha. And you mentioned a third type.
Right, revenue generating.
Yeah.
Basically, the government just wants to make money from the tax. Historically, that was a big deal. But for most developed countries now, it's not usually the main driver behind tariffs. Protection or punishment are more common motivators today.
Okay. Different types, different goals. But something that really jumped out from our source was this idea of who actually pays when a tariff comes in. It's not always obvious.
No, and this is absolutely crucial for listeners to understand. Even though the tax is officially put on the company importing the goods,
Right.
that cost, it almost never stays with them. It gets passed along.
To who? Us.
Usually, yes,
Yeah.
to you, the consumer.
Yeah.
It shows up as higher prices at the checkout. And interestingly, even if you buy something made domestically, its price might still creep up.
How does that work?
Well, maybe that domestic product uses some imported parts that now cost more because of tariffs. Or maybe, with less competition from cheaper imports, the local companies just feel they can raise their prices a bit.
Ah, less pressure.
Exactly. So it ends up acting like this hidden tax that bumps up the cost of all sorts of things you buy. Those few extra cents or dollars here and there, that can be tariffs at work.
That phrase hidden tax really resonates. Okay, let's zoom in on a specific time for U.S. tariffs around 2018. What exactly was going on then?
Yeah, the podcast script we looked at really focuses on this. The Trump administration put some pretty significant tariffs in place, mainly targeting imports coming from China.
Now we're talking big numbers, right?
Oh yeah, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods. Things like steel and aluminum basic materials used in tons of products.
Construction, cars.
Right, plus electronics, phones, computers, and even things like soybeans from the agricultural sector.
And what were the stated reasons? Why do it?
Well, there were a few main arguments put forward. One big one was trying to bring back American jobs, especially manufacturing, by making U.S. goods more competitive on price.
Okay, the jobs argument.
Then there was the punitive angle, wanting to punish China for what the administration saw as unfair trade practices, like issues around intellectual property.
Right, that was definitely in the headlines.
And third, there was this broader push towards economic self-reliance, trying to make the U.S. less dependent on other countries, especially China.
Okay, so jobs, punishment, self-reliance, those were the goals. But what actually happened? Did it work out like that? The source seemed less positive.
Yeah, the reality was, well, complicated and pretty painful economically in some areas. Predictably, China hit back.
Retaliation.
Exactly. They put their own tariffs on U.S. goods going into China.
Yeah.
And that hit American exports hard. especially farmers.
The soybean farmers you mentioned.
Yes, many of them had built up huge markets in China over years, and suddenly those markets just shrank dramatically.
Yeah.
Huge financial losses for many farming communities.
Wow. And what about consumers here? Did we feel it?
Almost certainly. You
Yeah.
probably saw prices go up for certain things. Washing machines were a classic example because they use a lot of steel.
Yeah.
Building materials got more expensive.
So even if you weren't buying directly imported finished goods.
Right. The costs were filtering through the system.
Yeah.
The idea was to help local industry maybe, but the higher prices often canceled out any benefit for the average person.
The hidden tax again.
Ah.
And the source mentioned something about bailouts for the farmers. That sounds backwards.
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yes, to try and soften the blow from China's retaliation, the U.S. government gave billions of dollars in subsidies to farmers.
So wait, taxpayers paid higher prices because of the tariffs and then paid again through taxes to fund the bailouts for the people hurt by the retaliation to the tariffs.
That's essentially what the podcast script points out, yes,
Hmm.
paying twice. And what's really striking is that even now, under a different administration, many of those tariffs are still in place.
Really?
Often cited are ongoing political reasons, negotiating leverage. It's complex, but they haven't just disappeared.
Which really makes you question the long-term effectiveness, doesn't it? And this brings us to the bigger picture. How do tariffs like these even mesh with, the global economy we live in now? It feels so connected.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And that's where you see this fundamental clash between tariffs and globalization. Our modern economy, the 21st century one, is built on these incredibly intricate global supply chains.
Right.
Think about almost anything complex you own. Our source used the smartphone example, designed maybe in California,
Yeah.
assembled in China using chips maybe from Taiwan or South Korea, minerals from Africa.
Shipped all over the world. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. It's like this giant worldwide assembly line.
Yeah.
And when countries start throwing up tariffs, it's like putting roadblocks on that assembly line. It just messes up the flow.
How so? What kind of disruptions?
Well, all sorts. Companies might start hoarding materials if they fear future tariffs, which can actually cause shortages and drive up prices. You might see delays getting products.
Like electronics, maybe? Or cars?
Definitely. Empty shelves sometimes. And when you have major economies like the U.S. and China in these disputes, the negative effects ripple outwards. It can contribute to broader inflation, think fuel, food prices soaring. It affects everyone.
So it's not just about the two countries involved. It impacts the whole system.
Precisely. A tariff might seem simple, tax and import, but in today's world, the downstream effects are huge and complex.
Okay, so mostly disruptive. But are there any situations where tariffs might actually be, a good idea, or at least justifiable?
The script we reviewed does concede that yes, in some very specific, limited cases, targeted tariffs can be a useful tool.
Like when?
Well, for instance, if a country is genuinely dumping goods, selling them abroad below what it costs to make them, maybe to grab market share unfairly.
With steel sometimes.
Steel is a common example, yes. Or if there's a big problem with dangerous counterfeit products coming in, like fake medicines, a targeted tariff or even a ban might be needed there for safety.
Okay, so a specific defense against unfair practices or dangerous goods. That makes sense.
Exactly. And maybe also in situations of major geopolitical conflict. Think about economic sanctions, which often include tariffs used against Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. They're part of a broader strategy to apply pressure.
Right, as a tool in international relations, not just pure economic.
Correct. So targeted, often temporary, with a clear goal that can have a place.
But what about the big, broad tariffs, like the 2018 ones we discussed, the ones without maybe a clear end date?
That's where most economists tend to get pretty critical. The consensus view, reflected in our source, is that these sweeping long-term tariffs, well, they generally don't work out well.
Why not?
They tend to make the whole economy less efficient. They reduce competition, which can stifle innovation. Why bother improving if you're protected from foreign rivals?
Makes companies complacent.
It can, yeah. And using tariffs just to send a political message or citing vague national security reasons for what looks like basic protectionism. Economists are usually skeptical that these achieve positive economic outcomes in the long run. It's like removing the incentive for industries to get leaner and better.
So potentially more harm than good overall? Okay, we've talked about who they're supposed to help, maybe local industries, but let's circle back to who really picks up the tab, who bears the brunt.
Well, the evidence consistently points back to everyday people. As we said, they act like hidden taxes.
So consumers pay higher prices?
Primarily, yes. And that hits lower-income households hardest because necessities make up a bigger chunk of their spending. But it's also small businesses.
So.
Many small businesses rely on imported components or materials for their products. Tariffs raise their costs, making it harder for them to compete, maybe even forcing them to lay people off or close.
And developing countries.
They can be hurt too, yeah. If they're trying to grow by exporting goods, new tariffs in their target markets can be a major setback. And then, as we saw with the U.S.-China example, farmers often get caught right in the crossfire of these disputes.
So it seems like there's this big disconnect. You have politicians and big companies talking about trade balances and strategy.
Right, these high-level debates.
But down on the ground, it's regular people and small businesses who feel squeezed.
Absolutely. The focus on national deficits or geopolitical maneuvering often obscures the very real, tangible impact on individual household budgets and local entrepreneurs. They're the ones who often bear the burden.
This all leads to a really fascinating, maybe slightly worrying question that our source brought up. Could all this tariff activity, this tension, be the start of something bigger? Like a move away from globalization, this idea of deglobalization?
It's definitely a term you hear more now, deglobalization. And it basically means this trend or potential trend of countries turning more inward. Yeah, focusing more on their own domestic economies, prioritizing local production, and becoming less reliant on international trade and those complex global connections we talked about.
And is that necessarily a bad thing? What are the downsides if that happens?
Well, there are some pretty significant potential risks. First off, realistically, no single country can make everything it needs efficiently.
Right, we rely on each other for different things.
Exactly. So serious deglobalization could mean shortages, less variety for consumers. Second, less competition internationally could mean higher costs and maybe lower quality goods over time as that pressure to innovate eases off.
Okay.
And maybe the biggest worry is that retreating from global trade could just make international tensions worse. More division, less cooperation, more mistrust between nations.
Are there signs this is actually happening now? Our source mentioned some indicators.
We've definitely seen things that point in that direction or at least raise the question. The massive supply chain disruptions during the COVID pandemic really highlighted the vulnerabilities of these global networks.
Yeah, that was chaotic.
And ongoing conflicts, like the war in Ukraine affecting grain and energy supplies, add to that. Shipping problems. Then you have the political side, leaders in various countries, increasingly blaming foreign countries or imports for domestic problems.
Yeah, that rhetoric definitely fuels protectionism.
It can. And the very act of putting up widespread tariffs is itself arguably a step towards a more fragmented global economy.
Yeah.
It makes you ask, are these moves really strengthening national economies in the long run or just creating these sort of isolated echo chambers?
Right. Building walls instead of bridges, economically speaking. It feels like a step backward in some ways.
That's a good way to frame the concern. The podcast script really concluded by hammering home how interconnected our world is now through technology, through trade, through a necessary level of trust. And it suggests that while tariffs might seem like an easy political lever to pull.
Gets headlines, maybe sounds tough.
Exactly. But they risk undermining that very interconnectedness, potentially leading us towards a future that's, well, poorer, more divided, and frankly, less able to tackle the huge global challenges we all face together, like climate change or pandemics.
So wrapping this deep dive up, I guess the big takeaway for everyone listening is when you hear about tariffs, remember it's way more than just some dry economic policy.
Absolutely.
It's actually an active force shaping the world around us, shaping the global landscape, and yeah, hitting your wallet in ways you might not expect.
It's a signal, really, as the source put it, about what kind of world we're building. Are we aiming for one with more open collaboration and shared growth?
Or one with more closed-off barriers and maybe more suspicion?
That's the fundamental question these policies raise.
It really shows how economics isn't just charts and graphs. It's deeply tied into our daily lives and the kind of future we're creating. So for everyone listening, maybe the next time tariffs pop up in the news, just take a second to think beyond the headlines.
Yeah, question who ultimately benefits.
And who bears the cost. Stay informed, stay curious. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.